Hello, this is Public Advocate. I'm Shirley Graves, and we're going to have our after-election discussion between our gentlemen here, the Republican and the Democrat. On my side, right side here, is Greg Brockbank. He is the owner-operator of the Marin Law Center in Marin, and he is a 22-year elected official in this but 22 years in elected offices, the Centerville City Council, many years on the College of Marin Board of Trustees. He's a senior member and past chairperson of the Democratic Central Committee. And on my left side here is Jack Wilkinson. He is a 40-year real estate broker in Marin County, and in 2015, he was named Realtor of the Year. He is a past president of the Marin Association of Realtors. So you've been operating in real estate for a while, it sounds like.
I have. I'm just beginning to understand.
So good. And he is on the Republican Central Committee also. So we're going to have a little bit of conversation about this recent election and then discuss the results, and then we'll go on and do some discussion about the bigger political issues around the country.
Yeah, what did we say? We've been doing this show for 13 years now, before and after every election, and sometimes special shows on politics. But usually, most of the local elections in Marin are in November of odd-numbered years. Mm-hmm. This year was different, although we had a few, and most of the usual city council races. Yeah. Nearly all the school board races are moved to even-numbered years. Nearly all the special district races are moved to even-numbered years because of a change in the law which said if you have a big difference in turnout between your partisan elections and your nonpartisan elections, in our case that's even-numbered years and odd-numbered years, then you have to move everything to the even-numbered years to get a better turnout. So
the current office holders get an extra year to serve.
In some cases, 1 year less than their term. They're shortened to 3 years. In some cases, extended to 5 years. That's another controversial issue in some cases. But the whole idea of combining our local elections with the presidential and gubernatorial and congressional and legislative elections is controversial in and of itself. Some people think we already have too long and crowded a ballot. If you add the local races to that, the voters are going to have information overload and not be able to decide who to vote for, or they'll just drop off and won't vote. Yeah. But it is true that the turnout is 70, 80, 90% in even-numbered years and 30 or 40% in odd-numbered years. So we'll get a better turnout. The question is, how many of them will actually vote for the local races, and will they know what they're voting for? Of course, that's always an issue. Yes. Anyway, so here we are with this year, two of the city council races that usually had races, Mill Valley and Tiburon, I think, had already moved their elections. That left, I think, 6 of the 8 that usually did it. 2, as usual, it varies which 2, did not have contested races, Larkspur and Santerfell. Santerfell for the second time, that's unprecedented. But that still left 5 city council races. Usual ones in Novato, although it was not exactly usual this year, and we'll talk about that, and also San Anselmo and Fairfax. And then there were 2 special ones in Sausalito, which moved to even-numbered years ago, but they had a special election for 1 seat from somebody who resigned. And Tiburon, that had a special election for 2 seats, even though 2 replacement incumbents were chosen and seated by the council in June. They were up for confirmation, if you will, a few months later. So a couple unusual ones and 3 regular ones, if you will, on these city council races. And let's start with Novato, since we're here in Novato taping this on November 14th. And Novato, although it only had the 2 incumbents running and 1 challenger, so it wasn't unusual in terms of the number of candidates running, it received a lot of attention and press because while both the incumbents were strong and well-known, Pat Eckland running, I think, for the 6th time or something, and Denise Athos her 3rd, and both of them did win handily as expected, there was a 3rd candidate, challenger Kevin Morrison, who didn't get very close, but he got closer than some people thought he would, and he definitely enlivened the race. And I always feel that even if a challenger doesn't have any chance of winning, as he didn't really have much, it's good for the candidates and good for the city and good for democracy to have a challenge. Even though incumbents always want, I really hope I'm not challenged. I'd really like to have a free pass this time. They're better off if they're challenged, and whether they admit that or not.
Well, they have to bring out local issues and discuss them more. I'm sure that's much better.
Well, winning a race in which you're the only one running is really kind of a false victory, isn't it? I'd call that a Pyrrhic victory, would you say?
It's much better, though.
Well put. But let's get into why this race was controversial. We were talking just before the camera started rolling about Pat Eckland, a long, long time incumbent. I think she's starting to break records for the number of times she's been mayor.
And she still got the highest number of
She
votes.
did, although it's very close. And she has
0.19%.
She usually has. And I have to say at the outset that I get along with Pat Eckland very well. In fact, we were close during my time on the Santa Fe City Council, and we were chair and vice chair of the Oversight Committee for Joint Powers Authorities, and we worked together really well and got along really well. And not only did she endorse me, like a few dozen other elected officials and former elected officials, she walked precincts for me. And I don't forget that. I'm always grateful for that. I appreciate that, even though we're a little bit different in philosophy. She's a little more moderate, and I'm a little more liberal, and we didn't always agree. But she's very controversial. She has a lot of people that think, and have said very bluntly, they think she's dishonest. I have not seen any sign of that, but they've said that bluntly, in public and private. And they think she's hard to work with. And I've seen little signs of why people think that. I just haven't personally experienced it. And the most controversial thing was that letters came out a week or two before the election from the immediate past city manager, Michael Frank, and the immediate past police chief, Phil Berg, blasting her. That is unusual. I have never heard of a former city manager and a former police chief a year after they left retired coming out blasting one of the people they formerly worked for when they were running for re-election. In fact, it's against the city manager code of ethics, but it's unclear as to whether or not that applies just to current city managers or past city managers. Now, he's not exactly retired. He took a job, Michael Frank took a half-time job managing one of the Joint Powers Authorities. So he's still around Marin working half-time, just not as a city manager, certainly not Novato's city manager. So was it appropriate what he said or not? Dick Spotswood was all worked up saying this is terrible. And I can see if you're a city council member, you would think, I would not want to be blasted by any current or even past city manager when I'm running for re-election. That's inappropriate, and he thinks it threatens the council member, city manager form of government. But there was a great op-ed yesterday.
I didn't see that letter that he wrote.
It was day after the election.
Day after the election? Okay, so it didn't have an impact on the election.
No, but it was still controversial nonetheless.
Well, controversial, but now my question to you is, were there actual facts or just allegations or just opinions?
Good point.
And it was just opinions, as I understand it.
It was opinions. He cites examples, but they're kind of not provable. Hard to work with. Ties things up in knots. Yes, somebody can be difficult to work with, and ideally, an elected official at any level has enough people skills to get along with their colleagues, their constituents, and city staff, especially key city staff like the city manager.
So why not ask what was the point of his writing that letter except sour grapes?
Good point, especially when there was no chance of her losing. If there was a really strong challenger, he could have weighed in and made a difference. Instead, he weighed in, pissed a lot of people off, and didn't really help the challenger win because the challenger did not have much chance of winning from beginning to end.
But it came after the election.
Dick Spotswood's column. But the letters came out 2 weeks before the election.
See, now that's just sour grapes to me. And if you have something that's true, that's one thing. But to voice your negative opinion to sway an election speaks of chicanery. And that takes away from the people. Does it do any good for the city? What he said, benefit the people of the city. Any elected official, including yourself, Greg, looks for working for the benefit of the citizen, not their own benefit. A guy that writes a letter like that is writing it for his benefit. That's the way it appears to me.
You may be right. You make some good points. And I just keep thinking, though, that the people skills needed are to work with your colleagues and the public and your key city staff, and especially the city manager, and remembering the chain of command. The chain of command is that, contrary to what some people believe wrongly, the city council members are not the boss of any individual employee. They are the boss of one employee, the city manager, and only collectively. The five of them together can make a decision and direct the city manager. And it's very tempting, but anytime a council member starts to say, you need to do this, or you ought to do this, or I want you to do this, to the city manager, over whom they are 1/5 of their boss, big mistake. I don't know if Pat did that or not, but I'm just saying it's very tempting, and I think a city council member needs to be very careful to remember their role as being 1/5 of the boss of only one person, the city manager, and they can't direct anybody to do anything unless there's a consensus of the city council.
I think we're spending too much time on this,
Okay.
and it's negative to Pat that we're spending this much time on it because she's been elected 6 times by healthy majorities. People must know what she's about after this many years. I certainly do, and I've been watching her for a number of years. Nowhere near as closely as you, but she has always struck me as thinking what's the benefit for the citizen, not for Pat.
I agree. And I don't mean to be too negative about Pat. I said all the good things I like about her personally.
Yeah.
And I just said what some people alleged about her, and it was printed in the IJ, and what I heard from some key people. And I don't mean to be too negative about her. And I completely agree with everything you've said. She's been elected multiple times, often by very healthy margins, including this time, although she and Denise Athos were very close.
They still got a big chunk of the vote. You know, they're 15 points ahead of the guy that came in third.
Yeah,
so,
who really didn't have much. Somebody said in Nevada there's two parties, the ins and the outs. Pat represents the outs, and I mean, maybe she wouldn't deny this in the sense that, you know, sometimes government is wrong. Sometimes you got to fight your own city government. That's an interesting position for a city council member. But I can see that there's some legitimacy to that. Denise Athos is clearly in the ins. She works collaboratively with people, gets along with everybody, widely admired and liked. I like her and admire her tremendously. And in fact, I support her and went to a fundraiser of hers. And she's done a lot of regional things that are very good. So I can understand why Denise Athos is liked. And I think I can understand why Pat Eckland is controversial. But she has a lot of supporters in the community that probably bullet vote only for her.
okay, let's move on.
Okay.
What you want to pick next?
Well, San Anselmo and Fairfax, in no particular order.
San Anselmo, there was no surprises there.
No, well, both of them had two incumbents running for re-election because an incumbent stepped down. Both of them had a challenger. I don't want to say a challenger. I only call them challengers if they are running against all incumbents. If they're not, if one incumbent has stepped down, it's like I call them a new candidate because they're not necessarily running against all the incumbents. They're running for the vacant seat. And in both cases, both incumbents were expected to win handily, and they did. The surprise was that in both cases, the top vote getter was one of the new candidates. I don't think anyone expected that in either case.
Right, but if you look at the vote distribution, they all got about 25%. The fourth one got 20%, then the fifth guy running got 5%.
Yeah.
So again, that's a close, I call that a close race.
Definitely. Bruce Ackerman, I had him, he came to my house for a fundraiser a few months ago. Nice guy, good guy, kind of quiet and shy and thoughtful and wonky looking. Even his own campaign consultant, well-known campaign consultant Paul Cohen, said, well, he's not exactly a politician, but kind of, apologized for him being so introverted and quiet and shy. I thought this guy's going to have a tough time. But he was on the planning commission. He's very good. And so was Cindy Swift. And I thought it'd be close for the two of them for the third seat. Well, Bruce Ackerman won top vote getter, although, like you say, it was close between all the top four candidates. And Cindy Swift came in fourth.
You're talking about Fairfax.
Yes, I am. Sorry, did I switch from San
Yeah,
Anselmo
you
to Fairfax?
jumped right out of San Anselmo.
Well, sorry.
They're neighbors.
Yeah.
They're not quite that close.
I do get them confused, but in both cases,
Oh, don't say that to them.
the new candidates were the top vote getters. San Anselmo had the interesting case of Brian Colbert, spelled Colbert, but like Steve Colbert of late night TV fame, he also pronounces it Colbert. And he hasn't been around San Anselmo that long, I think 6 or 7 years I read, and he's gotten on some commission, and he's incredibly charismatic and incredibly diverse background, not to mention that he's African American, and the paper said there's never been an African American elected, not just in San Anselmo, but I don't think anywhere in Marin to any city council. Anyway, he says he's been a corporate lawyer, he's run various businesses, he's been around the country and the world, and suddenly he says he's come to San Anselmo and he loves it here, he's going to stay here the rest of his life, and he has a wife that he credits for doing a lot of work at the campaign and an adorable little daughter. And so he's running, but I thought, I don't know if he's ready for prime time. I don't know if he's been around long enough. I don't know if he's going to raise the money and get the endorsements. Wrong. Voters had elected him top vote getter.
Oh, really?
He was that interesting and charismatic and said good things to people. Part of it is that when you have a kid in the school and you get involved in school activities, you're going to load a lot of people. So the loser in this was Steve Burdo, who's a friend of mine, who'd run before. I think he's a terrific candidate, and I expect him to win and grab that third seat. But he came in fourth, was the odd man out, if you will, because he couldn't compete with Brian Colbert's perhaps knowledge among parents of the school and the two incumbents.
Oh.
Now you can go to Fairfax.
Fairfax. Bruce Ackerman, the top vote getter, and the two incumbents, John Reed and Barbara Kohler, came in second and third again, all with lots of votes.
Again, but if you look at the distribution of the votes, and this is what I find interesting, the low vote getter had 11%, but all the rest were 15 to 19. Out of 6 people, that's not a big spread.
Actually, in Fairfax, the fifth and sixth place vote getters, Deborah Benson and Charles Cornwell, were dubbed by some as the Frank Egger candidates. You remember Frank Egger was on the council for 40 years.
Yes.
Ultra-liberal, but very controversial. He finally was defeated for re-election 10, 15 years ago. He's run for 3 or 4 things since, always lost except for the Ross Valley Sanitary District, which he won and won re-election for. And was doing quite well, stepped down to run for, I think, county supervisor last year and lost that, and he's now out of public office after 40 years on the council and another 10 years of activism since then. But he's known as kind of an anti-housing guy, which, you know, most liberals I know on the Democratic Central Committee are pretty pro-housing, and a lot of other groups I'm in. But Frank was pretty anti-housing. And his two candidates that he was backing, Deborah Benson and Charles Cornwell, that some people were worried about, came in fairly distant. Well, not so distant, I guess.
Well,
fifth and sixth.
Cindy Swift and Benson both got about 15% of the vote.
Yeah, they're about a
And
point
the
apart.
top vote getters got 19. So again,
Really close.
the difference
That was
is small.
close,
That's a
yeah.
small
I
difference.
agree.
It was a close
I
race
agree.
for all of them.
Okay,
agree.
so we got
So
San
those are the
Anselmo,
three main
Novato, and
races.
Fairfax.
You know,
Tiburon
that's why everybody should come out to vote, you know, if you
Yes.
really favor a candidate, because the way he was saying that everybody had between 15 and 19% there, and a few votes one way or the other would have made a big difference.
Now, in Novato, you need a few thousand, but in most
Yeah.
of these races, 600, 800, these city council races, in fact, we'll get to one where there's a 13-point difference, and now the results are not in yet. It could still flip, at least the third and fourth place candidates. But the final two races are, as I mentioned, the special races in Tiburon and Sausalito. Tiburon had two appointed incumbents, Kulik and Thier, Holly Thier and David Kulik and Holly Thier came in first and second with 35-something%. Don't take these percentages seriously because they don't really represent much in a race where you can vote for two people, which is all these races except for the next and last one.
Sausalito was one.
Sausalito was just one seat. But the two appointed incumbents won re-election rather handily in Tiburon, David Kulik and Holly Thier, and in Sausalito had one seat. Again, that was the one where somebody resigned 6 months ago.
Yeah.
The city council opened it up as they usually do to save the money on a special election. They had like 15 applicants. They narrowed it down to, I think, 5 or something finalists. They interviewed them, and they split 2-2 on two of them. So they had to throw it open. They had to have a special election, so they did. And there were 3 candidates. Susan Cleveland Knowles, who ultimately won, always seemed like sort of the favorite. She's the planning commissioner. I think she's a deputy city attorney in San Francisco. Ran a very good campaign, very smart and articulate. The one Republican out of all the city council candidates, Werner?
Yeah, Bill Warner.
Bill Werner. Don't know anything about him, do you?
No, he got 30% of the vote. He's an architect.
Yeah, second place, and I think that was the one that got 2 votes on the city council when they were
Yeah.
applying. And then there was a third candidate, Melissa Blaustein, a fairly young woman, I think, under 30. She has a teenage son who, it was another council member who has a teenage son who acted as Melissa Blaustein's campaign manager, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, she came in third, but we may not have seen the last of her. She was involved in some national political campaigns and very energetic and has great potential. I just think she grew up in Sausalito, but been away a long time and just returned recently. So that's it for the 5 city council races. You want to talk about the 5 measures, 4 of which won, in some cases narrowly as usual, but one resounding defeat. Go ahead, Jack.
Well, let me get this up here. The first one we'll talk about is the Marin Community Services District.
Oh yes, I forgot the 2 community service districts.
And that was a vote on Measure E, which, oh, wait a minute, no, that's not it.
He was
No, Marin Community Service District is always kind of
Yes,
controversial.
yeah,
There's 6 or
yeah,
7
yeah.
candidates.
Right, and there
there
were
are 2
5 candidates here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Marin City Community Services District?
I'm looking at the Marin Community Services District, at the votes that came in.
Royce McLemore, Terry Harris Green, Donald Parker. And then there were 2 different slates. And what's ironic is that the early return showed 1 slate winning, and the IJ went to press with that. They were wrong. It flipped halfway through the evening.
That's it. Those I don't have those. I got this off the.
So did I this afternoon, and it's the same thing that the IJ had on Thursday.
I got this off the Marin County voter list. And
Royce McLemore first with 190 votes. I think you may be looking at the Muir Beach Community Service District.
I'm looking at. Yeah, I am.
Okay, that had about
Okay.
5 or 6 candidates,
Yeah.
some
Okay.
2 or 3 incumbents and 2 or 3 former candidates. And that is a tiny district that had like 150 voters, and 80 of them came to a candidates forum a couple months ago. That's pure democracy, boy. I'm sure the race was decided at that candidates forum. Nobody needed to do any mailing or walking or phoning or anything. Everybody could see the candidates at a candidates forum and make their decision right there.
How many candidates?
5 or 6, including several former directors.
7.
Oh,
Now, again,
wow.
let's look
Okay.
at that vote distribution. This caught my eye.
You're talking about Marin City again now.
I'm talking about Marin City Community Services District.
Yes.
Top vote getter got 19%. Bottom vote getter got 12%. But the next one is 14, then 15. The difference between 15 and 19 on the top 4 vote getters is pretty small.
13 votes between the third and the fourth place vote getter. So that could
Right.
flip, but that's a point and a half because there's not a lot of votes here. 150.
Well, there's 356 out of 1,545 votes.
You have a different layout than I do, but 130, 149, 162. Yeah, you have the same numbers I do. There's
Yeah.
13 vote difference between the third and the fourth place vote
Right.
getters.
And when you look at the raw numbers, that's not a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
You know, the percentages tell you in a large race. Now raw numbers, that's interesting.
I know a couple of these, and Royce McLemore and Terry Harris Green and Damian Morgan, who's the narrow fourth place, ran as a slate. And issues included whether or not the Golden Gate Village, the old 1950s, 40s government housing for the Marin shipbuilding plant, should be preserved as a historic or torn down and rebuilt. If it's torn down and rebuilt, a lot of people felt, wait a minute, if it's torn down and we're kicked out, we're never going to be let back in.
And that's the drawback
And
to
that's
that plan.
that's a legitimate fear. Even though they promised, no, we'll absolutely let you back in. There's just going to be a delay of a year or two, and you can do it in phases. So you
So
build
where
some
do the
new ones.
people go for that year or two? There's a logistics problem, and
There
it's
is.
going to be tough to solve.
It is. It is.
That's where my mother and father and I lived, was in Marin City in 1946, when my father, they were building up the Marin ship and building ships, and my father's an accountant, and they had an ad somewhere, and my father said, my good, we were in Illinois. And my father said, wait a minute, so he wrote to them and he got the job. He was a great, accountant. And so we drove across the country. First time, we drove across the country and landed here. And he went down to the place in Marin. We had a motel or something. And they suggested, oh, well, here we've got rooms for the new people up in. So we were at Marin City in the building. We were the first people ever in that particular. We just had 2 rooms, lovely rooms.
This is a digression, and maybe you should have a separate show on this.
Okay.
On public housing. I heard a speaker a couple of weeks ago called "How Government Segregated Housing," how our government segregated housing, or something like that. And it was quite interesting. I didn't realize that you say public housing, and people think of overcrowded slums, and that is indeed the reputation it has attained in recent decades. But starting in the 20s and 30s, public housing was nice middle-class housing, but it's always been segregated. There'd be a white complex and a black complex. And after World War II, it actually got worse. But then they instituted, these mass production of suburban villages, and they would subsidize the mortgages, again, but they're all segregated. They're white restricted. That's why you still see deeds are no longer legitimate because they've been declared unconstitutional. But for decades, they had these racially restrictive covenants saying, Jack knows that, he's a realtor.
Well, I got just a story. A friend of mine, my best friend, Lou, is Jewish. And he and his wife bought a place in Strawberry. This is probably 1970, 71, 72. And he had a big party in this place in San Francisco and say, hey, I bought a place. And you got to look at these deed restrictions. No, and Jewish was no Jews,
No
blacks.
Jews. Usually they say have to
they
be over
were,
the
They
Caucasian
were
race.
not allowed in that restriction. That's one of his bragging things.
But he bought it.
Well, this is 1972.
But they let
This
him
thing
live in
was
it?
built.
Oh, wait, you mean
This-
years
no,
before?
these were written in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, okay.
And they're carried on,
And
even though they were declared
they're still
unconstitutional.
there.
20, 30, 40 years ago, they were declared unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But he did move in.
Oh, of course he did. The joke is he moved in. It was him making the fun. They're unenforceable, been unenforceable since, I believe, the Civil Rights Act of '64. That's what made all those
50 years
absolutely
ago.
unenforceable.
50 years ago, I was going to say longer. Okay. Anyway, but that was an interesting digression about housing, and I
So-
forget how we got there. Marin City, Golden
Marin
Gate
City,
Village.
yeah.
But anyway, so that's an interesting
my
race
story.
as always. I didn't know you started out there in '46, right after the war, huh?
Oh, there were so many. You could not find a place to live. We read the paper every night. We wound up living in 2 bedrooms up in Cascade Drive in Fairfax, that somebody saw, you know, that there was such a demand for homes and stuff. We lived there about 3 months, and well, what a drive, you know. And I mean, lovely, but what a drive, nice people. And then we did find a place then on Mission Street in San Rafael where a lady was renting rooms near the high school. That's all you could get in those days. There wasn't anything for rent.
That was 70 years ago. You must have been a tiny tot then.
46.
That was 71 years ago.
I was 14.
Oh, I should say that. Give it away. I'm going to add up here. Anyway,
Let's go to Measure A.
Yes.
These, the Lagunitas School District, they needed 2/3. They got 69%.
Okay.
That's added $535 for parcel tax. Now, what I find interesting, it's an 8-year, it's to extend the parcel tax for 8 years. It goes up 6.5% each year.
Oh,
a lot.
oh.
That's, yes, that
That's
is
a lot.
right.
And they're getting a school for this? Is it?
Yeah, it's for the school district.
And Lagunitas has had some controversies too about immunizations, and I think no, that's not the multi-age school district. That's the Ross
No,
Valley.
but they're complaining the state is cutting back their funding, and that's why they needed this. That's what the measure claimed.
So this is to replace state funding, which is being taken away.
No, yes.
Measure B, Larkspur, although I've never understood why general taxes require only a majority and specific taxes require 2/3. Should be the other way around. If it's a specific one, well, a majority should do it. If it's a general one, leaving it up to the discretion of the city council, that should require 2/3, and a specific one should require a majority. But it's the opposite, and this was required a majority, but although they can't earmark it specifically, the city council can say, well, we plan on using most or all of that for road improvements, and boy, do they need it. Larkspur was rated among the bottom in condition of their roads.
Well, this added, all this really did was extend an existing 2013 sales tax, but it added 0.25% to the sales tax. But the interesting part is there is no sunset.
That is interesting. That's unusual.
Most of them have a sell-by date. This
Yeah.
one has no sunset clause, so it can be removed, but it has to be a ballot measure to remove it.
And although I was just saying they required only a majority vote, they did get 2/3 just barely. But that's 60%
Well, they got it.
more than they needed.
Right.
And I don't see C on here. Oh, it's A, B, D, E.
D. A, B, D, and
D
E.
is, now Nevada
That's
had
the-
2 measures. One was uncontroversial, one was very controversial.
Right.
The uncontroversial one was the extension of their
The urban growth boundaries.
And that
Yeah.
passed handily with 72%,
Yeah.
and it only needed a majority. But the flood control vote, boy, talk about, I thought Ross Valley was controversial when it came to flood control. Apparently Nevada as well. Now, I'd like to know your opinion on that. They say there's always 30% of people ready to vote no on any tax measure. So basically everybody else has to vote yes if you're going to get your 2/3. But in this case, 67% voted no. Now, were they unhappy because they think the Board of Supervisors should have used its budget to do this and not have to
No,
tax them extra?
they
the
think
only
it's
thing.
just not necessary. I've done, a number of voters said we've got other measures taking care of this. This is added money to the budget and a burden on the public, and it's not necessary.
I heard, I read something that there was a Measure AA a couple of years ago. Is that what it was?
Oh, no,
And
that's
it was
I
the
don't
same
remember
thing.
that.
They
Bay
said
Area,
it's the same
Bay
thing.
Area wide, that was for sea level rise and flooding. But this is an individual flood control district. I know what it was. I read a day or two ago that everyone agrees that the work has to be done, but they disagree about how to pay for it. And Al Duggan, you probably know, who ran for, I think, supervisor last year, and he had a letter to the editor in the last few days saying that this should have come out of this Board of Supervisors budget. They have a $1.5 billion budget or whatever, and this is a fraction of a percent, and they should be paying for this rather than trying to ram a separate tax on top of it. And if we weren't paying so much for pensions, the favorite whipping boy, there's some legitimacy in their complaint of that,
Wow.
then they'd have more money to do this. That they're paying a higher and higher percentage
Yeah.
towards pensions, and people are increasingly uncomfortable about that.
Well, we'll get into that in a few minutes.
Sure.
Anyway, that failed,
Yes,
and
big
a lot
time.
of people were totally against that.
2-1 against. Who knows
The
if they'll
Mesa
even bring it
Park
back?
in
Ah, yes. There's
Bolinas.
There's the 5th.
I think that was very interesting. Everybody wanted that. It wasn't existing. They just extended it for 2018 and 19, the parcel tax of $99 a year. Everybody apparently wanted it. 81% of the people wanted it.
Oh,
Out of 300 and some votes.
Well,
It's a small district, but yeah, they wanted it.
80% is still 250 votes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's significant.
Now, we want to talk about national thing, unless you want to talk about some other philosophical issues, which I'm happy to do, as we did last time. But I think a lot of people were interested in what happened nationally at the election earlier this month. Specifically Virginia and New Jersey governor's races, and all kinds of other races around the country. But, you know, we political junkies who get bombarded with statistics before, during, and after the election. And one stuck in my mind I want to read to you, and tell me what you think. You know, a lot of it revolves around Trump. You know, although Trump pointed out that the Republicans had won 4 out of 4 special races. Actually, it was 4 out of 5, but Trump never makes a mistake, so he would never admit that. But his approval ratings started out at historical lows, below 50%, and have gone down now well below 40. And his disapproval ratings have gone up to, I think, in the high 50s. So that's pretty consistent. But here's the statistic: in Virginia, 34% of the voters said the main reason they cast their ballot was to express opposition to Trump. 34%, that's the main reason they voted, to reject Trump. They're voting for governor of Virginia, for goodness sakes, and maybe some local legislators. And the Democrats took back far more seats than anyone expected in Virginia as well. Now, there's also 17% of the voters that voted to support Trump. But that's quite a difference, 34 and 17. That means over half of all voters voted to support or reject Trump when they're voting in a local race that Trump was not on the ballot. But still, it's 2/3 of them were opposing Trump, and 1/3 were supporting Trump, of that 51%. What do you think?
Well, who's still president?
He is. Not much
Okay.
longer, I don't think.
Oh, give me.
Well, I don't-
Greg, you know, you want to use the word impeachment. I know you like to do that,
No,
but Greg, there's no reason to impeach him. None.
Well, there's plenty of reasons.
Well, it's called
I
high
don't think
crimes and misdemeanors, not your personal dislike. So we're going to drop that for right now.
Jerry Ford said the definition of high crimes and misdemeanors is whatever the majority of the House of Representatives thinks it is at any given time on any given issue. And for a while, I've gone back and forth, think that impeachment was likely. I no longer think it is currently, because the Democrats, if they tried to do it, they'd be accused of partisanship and sour grapes.
They couldn't be that.
Well, some Republicans said Obama should be impeached, but there was zero evidence for that and never got anywhere. Now, even if there's never any impeachment,
When you look at the past, that should have been. But
you don't think the 25th Amendment might eventually get Trump?
no,
Okay, here's what will. Mueller's
I
closing.
don't want to talk about that.
That's what I thought everybody was saying.
No, it's
Okay.
it's pure speculation.
Of course
It's
it is.
not, you're doing the same thing now that city manager did about Pat Eckland. You've got nothing, but you want to make your opinion of it.
I'm reading.
Well,
I'm reading the
he's here to
most
give us
you're
opinionated
reading.
and
Yeah.
knowledgeable bloggers
yeah.
and
Well,
national pundits.
You know, I read the same thing, and there's a whole
No.
lot of people that go against that.
Because of confirmation bias, I suspect we read very different things.
I don't think
There
so.
are a few people that read everything.
I'm more interested in things that are wrong being fixed. And I brought up Waters of the United States.
The last show, I remember.
Yeah. And one of the problems, and Greg, I'm hoping that you will agree with this. We have 3 branches of government.
I do agree with that.
Okay. And the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And one of those, the legislative, which is the Congress with 2 houses, their job is to make the laws. Is that correct?
And the budget.
So their job is to make the laws. Let's just deal
Yeah,
with that.
okay.
Is there any disagreement
No, of
there?
course not.
Okay. Should a bureaucracy be able to make laws?
You mean the executive branch?
No.
What bureaucracies are you talking about?
Bureaucracy. Well, the EPA.
That's part of the executive branch.
No, it's a separate bureaucracy.
Depends how you define laws. No, they shouldn't
Did
make laws like Congress
did
makes.
they be able to tell you as a citizen, this is what you must do? If you disagree with us, you're out of luck, you can't sue us. Do you think that they should be able to do that?
They
It's a
make
question.
Regulations. It's not the same as a law.
Well,
but they have the power of law.
It
in
has
most
the
cases.
full force and effect of law.
You don't believe that executive branch agencies have the power to make regulations? That's why we operated for
They
240
can
years.
make regulations, but do they say the regulations, you cannot question the regulation?
I'm not sure the difference between a regulation and a law is
Well,
how well you
the-
can question it.
The fact of the matter is, if a law is passed and the people disagree with it, they can address and redress through the Congress, can they not?
True, but
Okay,
a law
now-
remains the law until changed by Congress. Regulation remains a
Stop.
regulation until changed
Stop,
by
stop. Just answer the question. Should people have the right to aggrieve the law or the regulation? It may remain until it's adjudicated, but should they have the right to address it, their displeasure?
I think in both cases, they can be overturned only by the one who made that law or regulation, the Congress or the regulatory agency.
Craig, the question is, if you are a legislator and you make a law and I disagree with it, I can't demand that you overturn it until I bring it either to the court or I get it brought up on a ballot issue and get it overturned.
Same with regulations.
Should I have the right to do that? Or should I not be denied that right?
Of course you have that right. Who would say that you don't?
Therein lies the issue. The EPA has tried to block citizens' right to overturn any regulation that they have. And therein lies the issue. I brought this up last time.
I must have missed that point. So you're objecting to Obama's EPA because they tried to block citizens' right to overturn regulations?
Forget Obama. I'm not talking about Obama right now. I'm talking about the overreach of the EPA. I'm not casting aspersions on any particular person right now. I'm addressing the overreach of a regulatory agency. That is the total issue that I'm addressing right now.
Well, when you frame it like that, of course I don't believe that any regulatory agency should have the right to block people from, A, going to court and overturning it as unconstitutional. That happens all the time. And with the EPA, that happens all the time. Scott Pruitt, the head of the EPA, as the Oklahoma Attorney General, sued the EPA regularly to overturn their regulations. So how can you say that people can't?
Well, because right now, the nearly limitless expansion of federal power over property owners was a violation of explicit constitutional principles. The agency, the EPA, erected barriers to the public's ability to challenge WOTUS, to block many victims from suing to vindicate their rights. That's the issue. They're blocking.
No, I just wonder what this is. Property rights. Pacific Legal Foundation. Yes, I think you mentioned them last time.
You know, there was a man on the television last night being interviewed, was it by Tucker Carlson?
Yes.
Sean Hannity, and they said there was some kind of ancient frog on his property.
This is in Louisiana. It's the ghost frog that has never been seen in Louisiana.
Yeah.
That's why it's called the ghost frog?
Well, I don't know why it's called a ghost frog. It's kind of looks funny like a ghost. They've never seen it, yet they want to take over his 15,000 acres of his land. They're going to burn it to the ground because that's the habitat the frog needs that they've never seen. And he has to go to court. He's taking that to court to fight it. Now, I'm a little concerned when somebody wants to burn up 15,000 acres of wood for a frog. I mean, this...
Wait a minute. Who wants to burn it? The landowner?
No.
Regulatory
the
agency?
environmental, the EPA.
That would
Won't
wipe
they
out the
kill
frog.
the frog?
Greg, the point that I'm trying to make in some of these things that I'm bringing up is this doesn't always make sense.
Right.
And when we have the things that have been happening with the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers going in and making edicts and taking private property rights, big issue. I think you may have
I've never heard of this
that.
case.
Well, that's...
More typically, I think this is, I read the other day, and maybe it's more of a California Coastal Commission case, but I believe the EPA would work like this too. Is private landowner owns a bunch of chunk right on the beach, land, never been developed, buys it, wants to develop it, and the Coastal Commission says, wait a minute, we have regulation over that. Do we give you a permit or not? And they struck a deal where it says, okay, you can keep 90-something% of the land and you can develop on it the way you want, but you've got to give the beach over to the public. Now, some property rights advocates would say, that's unfair. You just deprived the landowner of his beach. And I would think, well, you could probably split the hair further and say, well, you get 10% of it as your own private beach, and the other 90% goes as a public beach. But there's a strong public policy in favor of public beaches.
Well, one of those things that's stated in that very law is that any taking must be a mitigation of something that was interfered with what the public owned before.
Good point. A
The
nexus.
Nolan case is where this came up in 1980, I think it was. Nolan wanted to develop their vacation home into a permanent residence. They got a permit, and then the Coastal Commission came along and said, no, you can't do that until you give us your beach. And they said, no, we can't give up the beach. It's ours. They took it to court. They got overturned. They won at the trial court, got turned over at the appellate court, took it to the Supreme Court.
U.S. Supreme Court?
The U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court stated that you can't take the land unless you're taking it to mitigate something that the owner of the land did to deprive the public. They didn't. So the mitigation clause, I'm not arguing with the mitigation clause, but if there is nothing to mitigate, why do you have the right to take the land?
Now that's a good philosophical issue, and you might be right, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think the California Coastal Commission, and perhaps by extension other government agencies, would say that the public interest is that the coast is overcrowded, the beach is, and the oceans are getting polluted. Therefore, we want to carefully restrict any proposed development on the beach.
You're adding issues
I'm
that
guessing.
we're not. Yeah, you're guessing. So
Well, I believe
we're talking
that's
about
that's the rule.
particular cases.
Now, if the way you say it is correct, is that you have to prove that the existing landowner created a harm, and in many cases, it's a new buyer that came in and bought a piece of property, never did any harm. And if you're correct about the Supreme Court ruling that's saying that you have to prove that the current landowner did some harm, and he has to mitigate that harm by, I don't know, fixing something or giving up some part of it to the public or something, then you're right. He shouldn't have been forced to give up the beach, and that was.
And he wasn't.
Okay.
And he won in the Supreme Court.
There's a lot of these beach cases. I get them mixed up. I don't know about the
Well,
Nolan.
I'm only talking about one. I'm not. I don't know what one you're talking about. In Hawaii, all the beaches are open. I mean, and Hawaii owns all the land. Nobody owns land. You lease it from the state.
Really?
Yeah.
It's hard to buy property there.
Yeah,
my
I think
gosh.
there's a few places you can get ownership of the land, but it's not on any beaches. My understanding, it's all leased land from the state of Hawaii.
So it varies
But
from
that's
state to state.
that's a different state. That has a different thing.
And California
the-
Coastal Commission is very controversial. Some
This
people think it exerts way too
15,000
much power.
acres in Louisiana, I mean, that's a pure taking with no compensation. I told you.
15,000 acres?
15,000 acres.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that big. This is the Nolan case?
No. The Nolan
Oh,
case
yeah.
was down in Southern California.
in
This is
California.
1980 or 82, somewhere in there.
This is the land,
This is the
waters
man
of-
that was on last night on the television.
Oh, yeah, that's last night. Tucker
The
Carlson
frog.
interviewed him. It was 1,500 or 15,000. Even if it's only 1,500, that's a lot of
the
trees.
ghost frog. I would like to
Yeah.
find out why the regulatory agency wants to burn it and why that isn't counterintuitive to what most people would think. They'd want to save the endangered
Save it,
species.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, I think they said that the frog doesn't need the woods. The woods are in the way of the frog's habitat. I don't know anything about the ghost frog. I don't really know anything about frogs at all.
Hard to believe that burning would improve the frog's habitat. It would kill the frog.
Yeah, well,
Let's
yeah.
look at what happened in Tehama County, and I think I mentioned this to you last time. The EPA came in and told a farmer who had just hired a contractor to plow 750 acres of his land that he could not do that because it had a vernal pool.
He said what?
A vernal pool.
Pool. Oh.
Yeah, it's rainwater. It's there
Yeah.
only when it rains. Under WOTUS, they want to take advantage of any gorge, river, or pond. You remember the salmon controversy we had here a few years ago?
A few years ago, ongoing for
Well,
decades.
it's still ongoing, but
Yeah.
there was a big issue about building permits and changing the building out in the valleys.
San Geronimo Valley particularly.
Yeah,
Still
and
going
one
on.
of the things it said is if there is water in a stream coming down for 2 days after a rain, you cannot build on that land.
You talk about this, and I think it's a good and important issue, particularly in Marin, particularly about in San Geronimo Valley, particularly about the salmon. And just today, I think as we speak, the Board of Supervisors is holding a hearing on this golf course, which I heard a speech this morning, somebody's practicing their speech before this afternoon saying, the golfers want to continue with the golf course because they like golf, okay, although it's losing money and losing favor and diminishing in popularity.
But if you owned it and you wanted to keep it going in spite of that, should you be denied that right?
No, unless the government takes it over by eminent domain, which is rare and politically very toxic, and so it's only used in emergency cases. But no, the issue is the county wants to buy it and preserve it all as open space. And some people, including SPAWN, the Salmon Protection and Watershed Network, are all in favor of that. They're the ones behind this. And a lot of environmentalists are. Save it all. Put it all in open space. Rewild it, I think is the phrase I just learned the other day.
This is
the San Geronimo Valley Golf Course. Now the trouble is all that nice manicured greens, I agree they use a lot of water and it'd be nice to save that water, but if they let that grow to, I read in a letter to the editor of the IGA today, 3 to 6 feet high, that becomes more of a fire danger. That's a consideration.
Right, and people can't really use it if they got to fight their way through it like that. It looks lovely
And some
now.
people are saying,
Yeah.
well, all right, you want to protect the salmon more, maybe take 10 or 20 or 30 or 40, 50% of the golf course and use it to protect the salmon, but you don't necessarily need all of it. Can't you use some of it for organic farms? That sounds like a good idea to me. Can't you use some of it for housing, which we desperately need? How about moving the firehouse over to a more convenient location? I've heard that one too. But the most important thing is, shouldn't the community have a say in this instead of the Board of Supervisors just literally at the last minute jumping in, buying it, turning it all into open space, which may not best meet the community needs? What do you think?
I can't believe that you said something like that I would really almost agree with.
Now, on local issues, we may agree on a lot of things. National issues,
The fact
probably
of the
less
matter
so.
is that this has been pushed by Spawn. The Trust for Public Lands is where they're trying to get the bulk of the money. And using $4 million, the seller wants $8.85 million. That golf course is nowhere near $8.85 million. A couple of things going on. Golf, I don't know, are you a golfer? Okay, so you won't be aware that golfing had risen to its height in the 80s. It has been dropping ever since. I talked to a premier developer of golf courses about this last week to see if he knew anybody that might want to buy the golf course. He said, nobody wants to buy golf courses anymore. They don't make money. They're dropping in popularity. A lot of people they're not playing golf the way they did 25, 30 years ago. Remember in the 80s, the Japanese were buying all these golf courses, overpaying terribly for them, which has hurt them and has continued to hurt them, but nobody wants to buy it. The next thing is all these greens, most of that is all purple pipe water, recycled water.
Including San Geronimo?
Yeah.
They're not near a recycling plant. Well, San Geronimo.
Yes, right next to one.
They do recycling water. Okay. I
Yeah.
thought only a few did and only a few places near the plant, but I didn't know.
Well,
San
that's
Geronimo.
I haven't seen the purple pipe. I was told
You're probably
that.
right.
But they're right next to a sewage
Yeah,
treatment plant.
that makes
It's
sense.
what, half a mile away?
Yeah.
Now, what concerns me is this fire thing. We just had all these big fires in Napa. If this is allowed to overgrow, which it would, it's just that's what happens. It presents a great fire break right now. God, I'd hate to see a fire in that valley.
Oh.
Number one, there's only one road in there, and it's a narrow little road.
Over White's
So-
Hill and over to
Well, yeah, over White's Hill, or you come out through,
Point Reyes Station.
well, yeah, or Lucas Valley Road to
Lima.
Nicasio and then come over. But still, it's hard to get to. I'm also very interested in why we need more open space. 80% of the county is already open space.
Depending on how you define open space, I agree with you, between national recreation area and
It's not land you're
agricultural
going to
easements.
build on.
Correct. Or A60 zoning is a lot of that, so you could build one house for every 60 hours, and that's acres, and that's too much for some people, so their malt is understandably trying to buy it up to preserve it, so we continue to have viable agriculture. Otherwise, more and more ranches in these times are going to sell out, so they can at least build one house for every 60 acres, and thank goodness for malt, who's buying them up and say, we'll give you a chunk of change in exchange for those admittedly limited development rights, so you will never be able to build even one house per 60 acres, so you can keep ranching forever. And they say, okay, I'll take the cash. I can invest in new machinery and equipment and go organic or whatever, and then I can pass it on to my children or sell it as a ranch in perpetuity instead of building one house per every 60 acres.
What's interesting about that is a voluntary exchange.
Yes.
Yeah, so as long as it's a voluntary exchange, I think it's a great idea. But I'm still concerned. We don't need that use. Now, building houses, I gave you some numbers at our last discussion. I forget how many acres that golf course is, but
100 and something, I think.
we aren't going to be able to build too many houses out there. That valley is constricted by the access to it, and already it's difficult to get to at any time. And one road, how are we ever going to expand that? Then we have a water issue. One of the problems that this county has is the only water source we have are the reservoirs. And unless we get a whole lot of heavy rains within 3 to 4 years without rain, we got a drought situation.
I agree those could be serious problems, traffic and water availability. That's why before any proposal for even a few houses would have to go through an environmental impact report that would carefully study and analyze traffic impacts. I haven't heard that there's big traffic jams in and out of San Geronimo Valley. And water.
Oh, there aren't. It's just to drive out there 5:30, 6 in the evening. That's just a lot of cars going.
And it may well be that a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen houses, nobody's talking about hundreds, I don't think, would use less water than the golf course currently uses. I don't know. That's what the environmental impact report would analyze,
Yeah,
presumably.
well, we don't know. The issue becomes one of the supervisors are beginning to force the issue.
Well, they may buy it all for open space, and it may be a moot point. There's no housing ever developed, nor moving the
Well, no,
firehouse,
it's
nor
the-
gardening,
It's
farming.
the use of the money.
I agree with that. Now,
$4 million of the county money to go buy that. We do have other demands for that money.
actually, I have heard that there's a grant coming in. Now, it may be that somebody is grossly overpaying for this, as you say, and it's not worth anywhere near $8 million. And what's forcing the issue promptly is one of the partners of the golf course wants to get bought out immediately so they can take their share and run. Well, that may be, but that's no reason to rush this process. Take a year or two if you need to. Maybe the other partners can buy out that partner, and they can wait a year, the rest of them, or something.
Well, therein lies one of the issues that always comes up that creates problems. Either side rush to judgment.
I agree. Take your time, develop a community vision for what that land can best be used for. Maybe housing, maybe not. Maybe organic farming, maybe not. Maybe moving the firehouse to a better location on the golf course site currently, where the clubhouse is, it's already well developed, maybe not. But the community ought to weigh in on that, not just the supervisors rush in
But
within
they're
a
rushing,
month.
they're rushing it through. Redoni wants to push it, and he's pushing hard.
I hear. Well, we'll be interested. By the time our viewers see this, it'll be a
It'll
done
be
deal.
done deal.
Well, we've got 3 or 4 minutes here, gentlemen, so if there's any more points that you want to make.
Is that all? My God, we just started.
Yeah. We were saying just before the cameras rolled that you said, every time I said I want to talk about Trump, and you said you don't want to, and he's
No,
still
I
president.
didn't say I don't want to listen to you talk about impeaching Trump. Trump is
fine.
making some significant changes, and he has done more good in the past year that he's been in there. We have our
By executive
Now-
order.
well, he got rid of some of the executive orders that were in place.
True.
Transpacific Partnership. I know you read it when it was put in. I remember.
Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Yeah.
No, it's probably one of those things that's 1,000, 2,000 pages. I don't know anybody's
Well,
read.
you read the synopsis, gives you enough of it.
yeah, well,
and what it does, first off, these things are not to our benefit. The Trans-Pacific Partner, one of the things that we have been-
Liberals agree with you. They don't like it. Although I heard that a majority of Democrats.
Greg,
Sorry.
I was talking. One of the issues that go on is that we have to look out for the benefit of our nation. And for so many years, we've had this attitude of noblesse oblige. We were the nobles, and we're going to save the rest of the poor people in the world. Well, those days are gone. Once India or China gets working on what built us, they're going to own it. You're going to eat what they want to eat, not what we want to eat. Well, it's not going to happen in your lifetime, or mine, or even my grandkids, probably. But the point is, we can no longer afford, as a nation, to be noblesse oblige.
I would like to follow that up at a future show, because it sounds like then you should oppose the Republicans' tax plan in Congress, because it makes the rich richer and the poor poorer,
Well,
further
how's it
depending
make
on
rich-
noblesse
how-
oblige.
Whoa. Make the rich richer.
80
10% of the population pays 70% of the taxes. Those are the rich people. You're probably talking about SALT, the state and local taxes. I got mixed emotions on this. First off, is California, does it have a budget problem? That's a
California?
yes or no answer.
Every state has a budget problem depending on.
No, Greg.
It has the
Does California have a budget
It has the
problem?
lowest property taxes and the highest income taxes and property and sales taxes. So every state is different.
Greg, I asked you a question. Do we have a budget problem in California? Yes or no? It's
Depends on
simple.
whether you think the priorities currently in
No,
place and the
I
directions
just-
we're going.
What do you think?
I think we have a terrible budget problem. First off, CalPERS is going upside down.
Okay.
And one of the reasons they're going upside down is the reason that the whole state is upside down is they've made unrealistic expectations of returns of income. It's like you got a family, you're raising kids, and every year you expect to get a 10% raise, and you spend like you're getting that 10% raise. One year you don't get the raise, what do? You got a problem.
It's controversial. I'm not an economist. You're not either. But what do you think the expected rate of return would be? It was 7.75 or something, moved down to 7.5. They're talking about moving down to 7.25 or 7. Joe Nation, former assemblyman, then now Stanford professor, and has done a lot of work on this, advocates lowering it to 4%, which is pretty radical. That would increase the rates that local governments have to pay so high that they'd be screaming bloody murder.
Yeah.
Larry Chu agrees with him. He's a respected local
and
council
I
member.
agree with him too. And
Should
I
be
would-
4%? I don't know.
I have money that comes into me based on investments. And it had been going along, the stock market for the past 80 years has been running about 8%. So if you take 6, you're safe. You're going to be, the money's going to grow up. It's high, it goes up. But if you look at overall. So in 2009, I sat down with my financial advisor. I said, what can we do? And he says, well, we're looking probably a real rate of 3.5 to 4.5%. So you don't want to take any more than 4.5% out of this money because it won't grow any faster, then you'll eat your principal.
Does that remain true for the last 8 years, do you think?
It's been true up until just recently. It's beginning to climb a little bit.
So it seems like it's taken off like crazy since last November.
Yeah.
Don't want to go there particularly, but
No, you don't want to go there because the public confidence in the economy has just ballooned and skyrocketed. I think Personally, I think that the stock market is a bit inflated. There's a bit of a bubble in it.
I think so too.
But I look at a whole lot of other things. One of the things I look at is real estate. And that's where I have investments. And I make sure, I've been analyzing investment real estate for over 30 years. And I've learned a couple of things in the process. One, there are landlords and property owners that live in a cloud, believe everything is always going to be fine. And they maximize and take every dollar out, and they fail to account for expenses. And then when I come in to look at the property, to go to sell the property to somebody, you have to look at all the numbers, and all of a sudden, there's a whole lot of stuff missing, like expenses and costs of operation. So I've been very careful. My costs of operation are probably a little bit fat, just so I'm not left with money if something goes wrong, not having the money.
I got a good real estate investment career. I know we got to leave in 2 minutes. And you mentioned landlord tenants, and I have been a landlord tenant lawyer for over 30 years. But I don't pretend to be a real estate professional. I know you are among the top few in the county, just judging by your few-line resume there. Here's my casual observance, however, is that 50 years ago, when starter homes in Marin, average, modest, relatively inexpensive homes were $25,000. Next decade, they were 50. Next decade, they were 100. Next decade, they were 200. Next decade, they were 400. Last decade, they were 800. Now they're about 1 point something. So they've doubled in value every decade for the last 5 decades in Marin. And
yes.
Presumably, is that about right?
Yeah.
Do you foresee that continuing indefinitely?
Here's the problem I see. At some point, you run out of people that can afford them.
That's happening now.
Well, it is happening now. Yeah. Now, where is it happening? Go over to Contra Costa. Go over to Vallejo. There's a big thing in the paper about Vallejo. You can buy a lot of house over there for $300,000–$400,000. Go up to Vacaville. You can buy a lot of house there. Why are the housing prices so high in Marin and San Francisco? Because everybody wants to live there. The job center is San Francisco or Silicon Valley.
That and the shortage of housing. I'd hope you'd agree with me. I mean, we keep bringing in jobs, but not enough housing to house the workers. So people are commuting in from greater and greater distances, more and more traffic. And because there's not enough housing, the prices keep going up faster than everywhere else.
That's
the
right.
Bay Area is very bad generally, but Marin's even worse than the Bay Area average, and San Francisco and San Mateo.
Well, gentlemen, we're going to have to,
Yeah.
we continue this the next time you guys are together. You are just a wonderful.
2 big elections next year, June and November.
Well, you guys are a wonderful couple of guests because you don't agree on anything.
But we're still friends.
Yeah.
I mean, it brings out all the points, We just don't sit here and go,
I don't think Greg and I would ever do that.
No. So thank you very much, Greg Brockbank and Jack Wilkinson. And this is Shirley Graves with Public Advocate saying thank you.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, Shirley.